my name's Andrew Bladon and I'm a Research Associate in the Department of Zoology. Now today I'm going to give you some tips for how you can attract birds to your garden. Obviously larger gardens are really good because they've got lots of space for birds to find food and shelter, but even in small urban gardens, or even if you've just got a balcony, there are still some things you can do to attract the birds in. Probably the easiest way to attract birds to the garden is to provide some food, and what kind of food you put out will affect what kind of birds you attract. High energy seeds such as sunflower seeds in these feeders, or as these no-mess hearts, will attract birds such as tits and finches, whilst insect-based food, such as these dried mealworms, will attract blackbirds and robins. You can also get suet-based food such as these balls, or these nibbles, which will attract basically anything. We found that the starlings particularly love them. Some people get annoyed by starlings taking so much of the food they put out, but if you are lucky enough to have starlings in your garden, it's great to encourage them. They are in decline nationally and have disappeared from many cities, so don't resent giving them a bit of a helping hand. How you provide food will also affect what kind of birds you attract. Tits and finches, and other rarer birds such as woodpeckers and nuthatches, will prefer to come to seed feeders like these, or these kind of feeders designed for fat balls. Whereas blackbirds and robins prefer to feed from the ground, or from bird tables. If you have space, try to offer a range of foods in a range of different locations to draw in as many species as possible. When talking about putting out food, it's important to mention bread. Contrary to popular belief, bread isn't particularly good for birds. It's relatively low energy, and it doesn't contain any protein. So it tends to fill birds up without providing anything that they need. In particular, when it gets wet, bread can also get stuck in birds' throats, making it difficult for them to swallow, so it's best to avoid putting bread out altogether. There are lots of places that you can buy bird food from, but it's probably best if you want to get high quality food for your birds to buy it from conservation charities such as the RSPB or the Wildlife Trusts. They'll only provide high quality food that's really good for birds, and the profits will go back into nature conservation at the same time. People also often ask if you need to feed birds all year round. Now obviously in winter, when the natural food is scarce, it's really important to feed the birds because the extra food supply will really help them out. But even in spring and summer, it can be really important to provide extra food. This is when the birds are feeding chicks and under the most pressure to find as much food as possible, so anything extra that you could provide can really help them out. And from your point of view, it can be really lovely to see those young birds coming into the garden for the first time. This year we've had blue tits, blackbirds, robins and starlings, and just this morning a family of young reds come into the garden for the first time. Along with food, birds also need something to drink. If you have the space, creating a pond in your garden is a great way to provide water for birds and also a home for lots of other aquatic animals. But if you've got a smaller garden, then having a bird bath or even a tray of water is still a great source of water for the birds. Now a really important thing is to keep these topped up at all times. In the summer, obviously, water can dry out very quickly, but in the winter they can freeze over, and if either of these things happen, then the water's no longer there for the birds. So make sure that you take the time to keep filling up the water in the summer and defrosting it in the winter, so the birds have always got something to drink. In spring and summer, you can obviously provide nest boxes for birds to use for breeding. Birds nest in all sorts of different places, so there are lots of different nest box designs designed to reflect birds' differing requirements. Standard nest boxes such as these, with small holes, will be used by blue tits and great tits, while nest boxes with larger holes will be used by things like robins. Other species, such as house sparrows, tend to nest communally, and so boxes for them tend to be larger and have 3 separate chambers next to each other. You can also think about providing nest boxes for species that won't actually land in your garden. Swallows, house martins and swifts all like to nest under the eaves of houses, and bespoke nest box designs for them can be fitted to the outside of your house to provide nesting opportunities for these aerial visitors. Siting nest boxes is really important. It's best to have them facing either north or east so they don't get too much sun and the birds inside don't get too hot. It's also good if they have a small overhang, and if possible, angle them slightly downwards so that the rain doesn't get in. And if you have a lot of cats in the area, adding a latch to the top can help to prevent break-ins. As with bird food, if you're unsure what kind of nest box to buy, shop with wildlife conservation charities, where the staff will be able to help advise you on the best design for the species that you're interested in helping, and also the profits from your sale will go straight back into nature conservation. With all of these things, it's really important to keep them clean. Bird feeding stations in particular can be a major source of disease, so it's important to keep all of your feeding trays and bird baths nice and clean. All you need is a bucket of warm soapy water. Just make sure that you rinse off all of the soap suds before you put them back out again. With nest boxes, obviously it's important not to disturb the birds when they're breeding. In fact, it's illegal to do so. Birds can have up to 2 or even 3 broods in a year, so wait until the autumn to try and clear out their nest boxes. Empty out the old nests and any unhatched eggs, and give them a thorough clean. Make sure they're fully dry before you put them back up, and then leave them there ready for the next year. This can help to prevent the build-up of parasites, which live in the nest and climb onto the young birds while they're in there. Wildlife appreciates wild spaces, so in addition to providing artificial nest boxes, food and water supplies, it's important to create other patches around the garden where birds can find food and shelter. Growing wildflowers or herbs, which attract lots of invertebrates, will in turn attract lots of birds. Leaving areas of the garden messy, in particular on your borders, having piles of leaves throughout the autumn and winter, and leaving areas of lawn unmowed will also help to create lots of space where birds can find food and shelter. For example, wrens are thought to be one of the most widespread birds in the country, and yet they're rarely seen in gardens because they're so secretive. So by providing places where they can go and hide, you can make sure they've got space to live in your garden, and then you can just set yourself the challenge of getting out there and seeing them. A major threat to garden birds, in fact all garden wildlife, are herbicides, pesticides and slug pellets. Although they don't kill birds directly, they'll kill the invertebrates that birds are feeding on, therefore reducing the amount of food that's available. Even applying herbicide to a lawn can reduce the number of earthworms living within it, and that's bad news for birds like robins and blackbirds that feed on them. If birds do eat poison food, then the toxins can build up in their bodies, and over time this can kill them. So keep your garden organic and wildlife friendly, and let the birds and predatory invertebrates do the pest control for you. I thought it was important to finish with a word about cats. Lots of wildlife lovers have their own little domestic beast at home, and we're no different, but cats do pose a threat to birds and other garden wildlife. One option is to keep your cat indoors, but if you are going to let them out, make sure that they've got a bell or 3 on their collar, so that birds get some warning when they're trying to hunt them. The other thing is that it's really important to keep cats indoors at night. This is when they're most prone to hunting, and also when birds are asleep and therefore most vulnerable to predation. So by keeping your cat indoors at night, and by only letting them out with a bell on during the day, you can greatly reduce the risk to wildlife in your own garden and elsewhere. I hope you've enjoyed this little tour of our garden and the tips to help you attract birds to yours. You can find more information on gardening for wildlife on the Museum of Zoology blog, and also on the websites of charities such as the RSPB, the Wildlife Trust, Butterfly Conservation and BugLife. And if you want to share the images of what you've seen in your garden, you can find us on Twitter @ZoologyMuseum and use the hashtag OpenYourWindowBingo.